Isulong natin ang pagkakaisa ng uring manggagawa at magsasaka, ang ating sandigan sa pakikibaka tungo sa pambansang demokrasya. Silang nagtataglay ng tunay na lakas na dudurog sa imperialismo, burokrata, kapitalismo, feudalismo, ang mga salot na pumapatay.
Sa bundok at nayon, parang alon tayong susulong.
Kukupkupin at palalayain natin ang kalunsuran, at ating itatatag ang isang lipunang malaya sa isang revolusyong sosyalista hanggang mapawi ang pagsasamantala. Isulong natin ang pagkakaisa ng uring manggagawa at magsasaka, ang ating sandigan sa pakikibaka tungo sa pambansang demokrasya. Silang nagtataglay ng tunay na lakas na dudurog sa imperialismo, burokrata, kapitalismo, feudalismo, ang mga salot na pumapatay.
Sa bundok at nayon, parang alon tayong susulong.
Kukupkupin at palalayain natin ang kalunsuran, at ating itatatag ang isang lipunang malaya sa isang revolusyong sosyalista hanggang mapawi ang pagsasamantala. At ating itatatag ang isang lipunang malaya sa isang revolusyong sosyalista hanggang mapawi ang pagsasamantala. Isulong natin ang pagkakaisa ng uring manggagawa at magsasaka, ang ating sandigan sa pakikibaka tungo sa pambansang demokrasya. Silang nagtataglay ng tunay na lakas na dudurog sa imperialismo, burokrata, kapitalismo, feudalismo, ang mga salot na pumapatay.
Sa bundok at nayon, parang alon tayong susulong.
Kukupkupin at palalayain natin ang kalunsuran, at ating itatatag ang isang lipunang malaya sa isang revolusyong sosyalista hanggang mapawi ang pagsasamantala. Isulong natin ang pagkakaisa ng uring manggagawa at magsasaka, ang ating sandigan sa pakikibaka tungo sa pambansang demokrasya. Silang nagtataglay ng tunay na lakas na dudurog sa imperialismo, burokrata, kapitalismo, feudalismo, ang mga salot na pumapatay.
Sa bundok at nayon, parang alon tayong susulong.
Kukupkupin at palalayain natin ang kalunsuran, at ating itatatag ang isang lipunang malaya sa isang revolusyong sosyalista hanggang mapawi ang pagsasamantala. At ating itatatag ang isang lipunang malaya sa isang revolusyong sosyalista hanggang mapawi ang pagsasamantala. Isulong natin ang pagkakaisa ng uring manggagawa at magsasaka, ang ating sandigan sa pakikibaka tungo sa pambansang demokrasya. Silang nagtataglay ng tunay na lakas na dudurog sa imperialismo, burokrata, kapitalismo, feudalismo, ang mga salot na pumapatay.
Mula sa bundok at nayon, parang alon tayong susulong.
Kukupkupin at palalayain natin ang kalunsuran, at ating itatatag ang isang lipunang malaya sa isang revolusyong sosyalista hanggang mapawi ang pagsasamantala. Isulong natin ang pagkakaisa ng uring manggagawa at magsasaka, ang ating sandigan sa pakikibaka tungo sa pambansang demokrasya. Silang nagtataglay ng tunay na lakas na dudurog sa imperialismo, burokrata, kapitalismo, feudalismo, ang mga salot na pumapatay.
Mula sa bundok at nayon, parang alon tayong susulong.
Kukupkupin at palalayain natin ang kalunsuran, at
Philippines. We are your hosts for today's launch of the second book in Jose Maria Sison's Reader Series of Selected Writings. The first book launched last month featured 5 decades of his writings on art, literature, and culture.
The book today has a seemingly daunting title, On the Philosophy of Marxism-Leninism-Maoism. But relax lang, because when we talk about philosophy, we talk about the love of wisdom, knowledge, and how we answer questions and solve problems.
Yes, we talk about the importance of 3 philosophers, Karl Marx, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, and Mao Zedong. As thinkers and doers, they teach us that another system is possible for the 99%, for the working class, for all those talking about revolutions, and for all those who believe in alternatives to a world driven by profit.
Remember, Sarah, how Marx wrote, the point is not only to interpret the world, but to change it? The book we are launching today is a great contribution to understanding them and a powerful tool in shaping society.
Definitely, Chico. The Philippines has a long and fascinating history of how the words of these philosophers were put into practice. And so now to start the program, let's hear from no less than the author himself about how he responded to their legacies while helping build the struggle for nationalism and democracy.
An analyst, an always youthful teacher of philosophy, and a continuing student of people's struggle and movements, let us welcome Professor Jose Maria Sison.
Dear friends, I'm deeply pleased and highly honored by the international launch of my book on the philosophy of Marxism-Leninism-Maoism. I thank the organizations sponsoring this event, the distinguished book reviewers, and all others who are participating. I appreciate the International Network for Philippine Studies for publishing this book in the Sison Reader Series and for making it available to academics, activists, and other readers through international e-publishing outlets and the popular bookstore in the Philippines. The overall guide of the People's Democratic Revolution in the Philippines is the universal revolutionary theory of the proletariat, Marxism-Leninism-Maoism. It is therefore necessary for those interested in this revolution to read and study the book that is now being launched. The class analysis of the history and current social circumstances, the basic problems of the people, the revolutionary forces in motion, the strategy and tactics and socialist direction of the ongoing revolution are most profoundly and comprehensively understood by studying the philosophy of Marxism-Leninism-Maoism. I am confident that the book reviewers will be able to draw attention to major points of significance and relevance in the book in order to arouse further interest in reading and studying the contents of the book. Once more, my most heartfelt thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Professor Sison, for sharing your thoughts on the philosophy of MLM. We're looking forward to the whole book. We also invite all of you out there to send him questions through the comment box on YouTube or Facebook and in the chat box of Zoom for our conversation later.
How these philosophers have actually put their political philosophy in poetic verse. Let us now hear from cultural workers Jen Brinkman and Noel Saturay recite poetry written by Marx and Mao and a poem on Lenin.
The rock wings fanwise, soaring 90,000 li, and rousing a raging cyclone. The blue sky on his back he looks down, to survey man's world with its towns and cities. Gunfire licks the heavens, shells bit the earth. A sparrow in his bush is scared stiff. This is one hell of a mess. Oh, I want to flip and fly away. Where may I ask? The sparrow replies. To a jeweled palace in Elfland's hills. Don't you know a triple pact was signed under the bright autumn moon 2 years ago? There'll be plenty to eat, potatoes piping hot, beef-filled goulash.
Lenin
Stop
walks
your
around the
windy
world.
nonsense.
Frontiers
Look,
cannot bar
The
him.
world is being turned upside down.
Lenin walks around the world. Frontiers cannot bar him. Neither barracks nor barricades impede, nor does barbed wire scar him. Lenin walks around the world. Black, brown, and white receive him. Language is no barrier. The strangest tongues believe him. Lenin walks around the world. The sun sets like a scar. Between the darkness and the dawn, there rises a red star.
Never can I perform in calmness what has seized my soul with might, but must strive and struggle onward in a ceaseless, restless fight. All divine enhancing graces would I make of life a part, penetrate the realms of science, grasp the joy of song and art. Let us do and dare our utmost, never from the strife recede, never live in dull inertia, so devoid of will and deed. Anything but calm submission to the yoke of toil and pain. Come what may, then hope and longing, deed and daring still remain.
Darum lasst uns alles wagen, nimmer rasten, nimmer ruhen, nur nicht dumm so gar nichts sagen und so gar nichts wollen und tun, nur nicht brütend hingegangen, ängstlich in dem niedern Joch, denn das Sehen und Verlangen und die Tat, die bleibt uns doch.
We have just listened to Two Birds, a dialogue by Mao Zedong, Lenin by Langston Hughes, and Sensation by Karl Marx. Thank you, Jen and Noel, for the wonderful poetry reading.
Sarah, alam mo ba na Jen read the Marxist poem in the original German text, Darum lasst uns alles wagen, or roughly translated, Therefore let us dare do everything. I think in the Filipino context, that would be dare to struggle or dare to win. This poem speaks of the need for us to risk everything to undertake action, not just to wish nor brood, but to action.
Okay. Ich wusste es nicht. I did not know, but it's good to know. Um, but hey, Chico, do you see these revolutionaries are philosophers and poets as well, like Marx, Lenin, and Mao? Professor Sison wrote articles and statements, interviews, and poetry understood by the masses and studied by intellectuals from different generations. Together, these become a powerful force to defend ourselves against attacks and overcome challenges to advance the struggle.
Yes, thank you. Um, Now, let us hear what our three guest reviewers have to say about the book.
Sure. Our first reviewer is from the Congress of Teachers and Educators for Nationalism and Democracy, Best Teachers Org, my org, and is a core group member of the Philippine Ecumenical Peace Platform, which advocates for justice and peace. Let us all welcome and hear from Professor Jerry Imbong.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the editor, Julieta de Lima, and the author for inviting me to review his latest publication. I congratulate Professor Sison for the second part of uh, Sison Reader Book Series. It is a great honor to be part of this book launching, especially that the contents of the book are very much in line with my field, philosophy. I first heard of Professor Sison during my high school days in the late 80s in Cebu. Back then, I was actively involved in a cultural group in our parish. It was also during that time that I was initiated to the student movement. During weekends, we would discuss, the gospel. We would do some gospel reading, Bible study, and afterwards we would collectively study also PSR, or the Philippine Society and Revolution. That was my first encounter with Professor Sison. My second encounter was when I was in the seminary from 1996 to 2004. Together with fellow seminarians and junior religious sisters, we would discuss some of Professor Sison's writings, especially during our exposure immersions to various sectors. By studying his works, I was able to apply the Christian faith to concrete conditions in our apostolate areas. When I left the seminary in 2004, I was fortunate enough to find a teaching position at the Colegio de San Juan de Letran in Intramuros, Manila. During my first 3 years, I taught theology. However, I decided to transfer to the social science area since my master's and PhD is on the field of philosophy. Letran boasts of its famous alumni in various fields of specialization. In its 400 years of existence, Letran has produced prominent leaders from top government officials, media and legal personalities, businessmen, heroes of the revolution, educators, men of cloth, and even saints. One common thread that binds all these exceptional figures is the unwavering love for God and country, propelled and animated by Letran's ideal of Deus Patria Letran. Jose Maria Sison is one of the greatest political theorists Letran has produced. As a revolutionary, he stands alongside Apolinario Mabini and Emilio Jacinto, both notable Letran alumni. As a poet, writer, and artist, he joins the ranks of other famous Letran alumni like Francisco Balagtas, Bienvenido Lombera, and Rolando Pino. In 2018, I submitted a research proposal as part of Letran's quadricentennial celebration. I submitted a research proposal to Letran Research Center to do a research on Professor Sison's political philosophy. There were those other colleagues from the department who did research work on the life and legacy of other famous Letran alumni like Bienvenido Lombera and Rolando Tinio. So I decided to do a separate research on Professor Sison. Since the research was about political philosophy, I immersed myself with Professor Sison's works, reading some of his major works. And this was my third encounter with Professor Sison. During the course of my research, I was also able to interview regarding his views on critical theory or the Frankfurt School. The excerpt of this interview is included in this present volume. I came to know more about Professor Sison when I became a core group member of the Philippine Ecumenical Peace Platform, or PEPP. As a church-based peace advocate, we would always welcome Professor Sison's initiatives to pursue the peace process. We admire his passion in advancing the peace talks. Bishop Bert Calang of the Iglesia Filipina Independiente, my co-worker at PEPP, would always tell stories about his experiences with Professor Sison and other NDFP consultants in Europe. As peace advocates, we were saddened by the Anti-Terror Law Council's inclusion of Professor Sison and his wife, Julie, in the list of designated terrorists. Reading the essays contained in this book made me realize, first and foremost, the importance of philosophy in our work as members of the academe and as social activists. As the title suggests, the current volume is about philosophy, or the link between philosophy and politics. The French philosopher Alain Badiou argues that philosophy should be conditioned by, quote, actually existing forms of politics. This means that philosophy must be able to be at the service of politics, which should lead political activists and militants with an answer to the classical question, what is to be done? This is exactly what the present volume delivers. The essays found in this book provides us with answers to the question, what kind of philosophy must we adopt? And how can philosophy be at the service of politics? The present volume is an antidote or an antithesis to what the French Marxist or philosopher Louis Althusser calls passive or resigned philosophy. The philosophy found in this book is an active philosophy. When you say active philosophy, that is philosophizing, submitting to the order of the world, because we know that the order of the world can change. It is dialectical. In this second sense, to take things philosophically has to do with knowledge of the rational necessity of the course of the world or evolution of history. It is putting philosophy to work in a practical way. The collection of essays and articles in this book is an affirmation for all the historical, theoretical, and practical reasons that the time is right and the moment is favorable for taking critical stock of the state of MLM philosophy. Arguably, this book is able to demonstrate MLM's revolutionary nature and how to putting it into work without delay on various scientific problems, some of which have direct bearing on the class struggle today. This fine work is an outcome of more than 4 decades of conceptualizing and appropriating the universal theory of the proletariat. If it is true, as the Marxist and psychoanalyst Erich Fromm postulated, that Marx's writings and thought have been given a one-sided treatment and distorted interpretation, emphasizing only the economic aspect of his teachings and little on the philosophical humanist aspect, then this present work is a visionary response to this diagnosis. By amalgamating the materialist philosophy found in the works of Marx, Lenin, and Mao, Professor Sison highlights the basic philosophical assumption that one must start not with man's ideas, man's consciousness, but with the real man and the real conditions of his life. This seminal work, uh, the work on Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought as guide to the Philippine Revolution, narrates the historical process of applying MLMZT in concrete circumstances of the Filipino people. It starts with an analysis of Philippine history and society, affirming the semi-colonial and semi-feudal character of present-day Philippine society. Subsequent topics deal with refuting the errors committed by revisionist renegade party members such as right opportunism, left opportunism, bourgeois subjectivism. The fierce ideological struggle within the party eventually led to the publication of a comprehensive and important documents of the party. These reaffirm our basic principles and rectify errors and other important documents. An in-depth exposition and discussion of Marxist philosophy are found in the articles A Comment on Dialectical Materialism, Idealism and Mechanical Materialism, Some Questions on Dialectical Materialism, On Dialectical Materialism, first of a series of webinars on Sison's Basic Principles of Marxism-Leninism, and so forth. No, the other very informative and interesting articles you can find there, like Dialectical and Historical Materialism, a review. These are all philosophical in nature. What weaves these philosophical essays together, and perhaps the greatest contribution of the work, come from its emphasis on the unity or fusion between theory and practice. Acknowledging the primacy of practice, the author asserts that philosophy's role is to raise actually existing practices to the level of theory. Interestingly, this volume contains 4 articles that deal with the church involvement in the fight for social liberation, as well as a critique of its ideological underpinnings. These are the articles that deal with these topics are the role of the church in social change, ideologies in the Philippines, Sophism of the Christian social movement, and ideology and religion in the Philippines. These 4 articles can become useful tools for church people as they continue to link arms with the basic sectors of society in their struggle for building a truly just, democratic, and free society. As the author suggests, at the philosophical level, there are the basic principles that completely differentiate Marxism, Leninism, Maoism from either of these two, that is, Christianity and bourgeois realism. But at the political and social level, there are grounds of dialogue and cooperation for those who are patriotic and progressive. Lastly, on the philosophy and Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, the book is a timely response to the increasing demonization and vilification of activists and revolutionaries in the country. The series of malicious red tagging and consequently the harassment, threats, and intimidations that accompany it calls for a more resolute and persistent political and ideological work in order to disseminate these marvelous ideas to the vast majority of the Filipino people and apply these in their everyday struggle for social liberation. After all, as Mao reminds us, social practice is the only criterion for truth. Thank you, and once again, good afternoon.
Thank you, Professor Imbong. Teka, okay. Let's do isang bagsak, but let's not do it on the table or else our camera will move. So let's everybody put their hands out like this. Raise your hands. One bagsak for Professor Imbong. Go. Okay, one more time, one more time. That was just practice. One more time, one more time. Put your hands out. And one bagsak for Professor Imbong. Okay. Our second reviewer is a translator, an interpreter, a writer, and a political activist. Her novel, Sovietica, is about life in the USSR and can be read in Russian, French, Dutch, English, and Sinhalese. Let us hear from Irina Malenko.
I have the honor of reviewing Professor Sison's newest book on Marxism, Leninism, and Maoism philosophy. It is a great book in the sense that it is a collection of his works on the topic of philosophy of Marxism, Leninism, and Maoism for the last 50 years, which is a very substantial period of time. It's important, first of all, because of the growing importance of the revolutionary theory for the international communist movement. In our modern times, there are far too few authors who properly and deeply develop a revolutionary theory in our concrete modern conditions, because unfortunately many younger comrades in different countries still lack the deep theoretical knowledge of the classic works. In this sense, this book could not be more timely. We live in a period of great changes. We feel it every day. Professor Sison stressed in his various works of the last few years that this is the eve of upcoming great revolutionary changes, and we should be well prepared for them. It is our duty to acquire the necessary knowledge in order to defeat the decaying capitalist system and to build the new, better world. And I think this book is an excellent instrument for us to achieve this knowledge that we will need so badly. As Professor Sison correctly states, having the materialist scientific outlook and applying dialectical materialism facilitate the understanding of all matters and the solution of problems in the revolutionary process. So it is really essential for us to have a proper knowledge of the revolutionary theory. There are works collected in this book which are aimed at audiences with various level of knowledge of the revolutionary theory, from the basics to much more deeper analysis of various Marxist books. So if I start from the basics, I can mention here such works as Basic Principles of Marxism-Leninism, written in the 1980s, on Proletarian Standard Outlook, Introduction to Marxism-Leninism-Maoism, which was written very recently this year, in January this year. And of course, if we look at in-depth analysis of such classic works as On the Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State by Friedrich Engels, and also the discussion of Anti-Düring by Friedrich Engels, and general views of Lenin's theory of modern imperialism, all of these are excellent examples of how revolutionary theory can be not just studied, but also developed in our modern times. It's about reviewing and further developing basic principles, as Professor Sison correctly states. This book also gives us, as foreign comrades, a good guidance in the history of the revolutionary movement in the Philippines in the context of Marxist, Leninist, and Maoist teachings. It's important not only for the young people in the Philippines themselves, but also for comrades in other countries, as it allows us to learn from each other's experience of struggle. And Professor Sison's works show how revolutionary theory is applicable in the concrete practice of the Philippines. Many of those things are not well known in other countries, particularly in Eastern Europe, so I think it would be great if our Eastern European comrades could familiarize themselves with those works. I think also the experience of the rectification movement in the Philippines is particularly interesting and important for our comrades in Eastern Europe today, because unfortunately when it comes to Marxist, Leninist, and especially Maoist philosophy, there are some deep divisions, and as a lot of people in Eastern Europe these days, people of my age and older, because we studied Marxism-Leninism at universities, a lot of people think we know it all, but In fact, quite often our knowledge is superficial and not really tied to practice. So I think we have a lot of work to do in Eastern Europe in relation to this. So we need work. We need such books as this one. Also, very important for us is question on the Mao Zedong thought on Maoism. Because simply in Eastern Europe we lack knowledge of Mao's works. We lack it very badly. When I read Kajoma's tribute to the great communist Mao Zedong, written in 1976, it brought a lot of personal memories for me. I was 9 when Comrade Mao passed away. I remember because it was in September, the school year just started. At that time, I didn't know much about him, probably like young people in Western Europe today, in Eastern Europe as well, know very little about Stalin and a lot of very negative opinions and so on. That's because the relationships between Soviet Union and China at that time, at the time of Comrade Mao passing away, was at its lowest point probably. So there was no opportunity for us to familiarize ourselves with his teaching. In this sense, it's very important to realize what we are lacking by not knowing Comrade Mao's works. As Professor Sison correctly points out, Maoism is the third stage of the development of the universal theory and practice of the revolutionary proletariat. The great contributions of Mao and the 6 components of Maoism will always stay in the history of the revolutionary movement. He writes also that we should underscore Mao Zedong thought as the further development of Marxism-Leninism. And it actually, I must thank our Filipino comrades and Kajoma personally that I actually began to read Comrade Mao's works. Thanks to you, I realize now that there is a need to break through in this continuing dismissive attitude toward Comrade Mao's work, even among communists in Eastern Europe, as it still often happens. We overcame this about Stalin because Stalin's works were also not available to general public during the Brezhnev years. And I think now we can and should overcome this sort of attitude towards Comrade Mao's works as well. This will allow us to enrich our theoretical knowledge and also practical knowledge of how to apply it in the struggle, how to evaluate properly the mistakes of our own past that could have been prevented. Soviet bureaucrat communists after Stalin were quite often arrogant and a bit chauvinistic, even though they would have denied it. Hence this attitude that only our Soviet theoretical works were correct, and this dismissive attitude towards works of comrades from other countries. And today we are paying the price, among other things, for this kind of attitude. What I also find particularly inspiring in Kajoma's newest book is that it's not just about theory, it's about detailed application of this theory in practice. In such works as Build the Bolshevik Type of Party and Revolutionary Mass Movement, Marxism-Leninism-Maoism Thought as a Guide to the Philippine Revolution Development, development, current status and prospects of Maoist theory and practice in the Philippines. I was actually present at some of the webinars that you had recently on works of Engels and on dialectical materialism and historical materialism. And in a way, it brought me a little bit back to my student days in Soviet Union. I must admit that during those days I found particularly challenging to understand the concept of dialectical materialism. But now, over the years, it became a lot more clear to me. Not only I began to understand it properly, not just learning, out of my head from the books, but really understanding. But I also understand how essential this understanding is for being able to become a true revolutionary and for seeing a clear path towards a communist future. Some of these works that published in Kajoma's latest books are already translated into Russian, and they're already published in our magazine in Russian, which is called Contemporary Marxism or Marxism Today. It's been published in Ukraine, but it's international magazine in Russian language, and it's available in different countries and also online. We already translated such works as Lenin at 150 years, Lenin lives, significance of the Paris Commune of 1871 and its relevance to the world proletarian revolution, and some questions on dialectical materialism. My interest was also triggered by such works as On the Correct Handling of Contradictions Among the People and On Practice and Contradiction. That probably again comes from my from the fact that my knowledge of Mao thought is still not sufficient. I'm working on it. But when I thought about contradictions, I remember a friend of mine. It's a retired history teacher from Luhansk, in Ukraine. His name is Felix Garelik, and he moved to Germany because his children moved to Germany, and he lives there, but he's very unhappy. He was going back home to Lugansk at least once a year, but now he can't because there is a war. And he's just a history teacher, but he also tried to think about contradictions, for example, contradictions in a socialist society. And he even developed his own theory that the main contradiction of socialism is contradiction between people's high expectations and the reality that was lagging a bit behind, citing as an example that Khrushchev promised us communism to be built by 1980. I wish he could read all your works, Kajoma, and maybe have a discussion with you and your comrades. One of the most important and urgent tasks of the communist movement is the struggle against revisionism. In Russia, we have a very difficult situation with it. There's a lot of splits between we already had about 4 main communist parties, but now there is also split in one of the most important ones. I think a lot of people, because they lack the knowledge of revolutionary theory, of Marxist-Leninist and Mao thought philosophy, they are sort of lost. And without defeating our ideological opponents who pretend to be true revolutionaries and who try to sow confusion among those comrades who are not soundly ideologically prepared, without defeating those revisionists, we cannot successfully march forward. So in this sense, such works as Stand for Socialism Against Modern Revisionism and On Trotsky and Other Slanderers, I think are very important. I think most of the works included into this book are very important to translate into other languages. We already made a suggestion to make a compilation of Kajoma's most important works so that we can translate his works, let's say even several volumes of his works in Russian and publish it in Russian language. Maybe we in Eastern Europe should also prepare a compilation of most important work on such issues as how to build a Bolshevik type of party. For example, we could take Kajoma's work about build a Bolshevik type of party and the revolutionary mass movement, and also publish it together with Ludo Martin's book on Party of the Revolution. Because I think we do not know in Eastern Europe sufficiently of the works of our contemporary foreign comrades, and it would help us all, help our ideological and political education, and help us to move towards our mutual goal, and that is not just to explain the world around us, but also to change it. I sincerely would like to thank Kajoma for such an excellent book, and I hope we will read more and more books of him to come this year and next year and many, many years ahead. Thank you very much.
Sharp as ever, poignant as always. Thank you, Comrade Irina. Our final review of the book is will be shared by a former faculty regent of the University of the Philippines, where he's also a professor at the Center for International Studies. We invite Professor Ramon or Bomen Guillermo to present his review.
Hindi isang tanong, kundi isang imperatibo para sa sangkatauhan ang pagkikibaka at pagwawagi laban sa kapitalisang sistema sa ika-21 na siglo. Tulad noong nakaraan, sosyalismo o barbarismo pa rin ang pagpipilian. Hawak ng mga imperialistang bansa ang sapat na armas upang pasabugin ang planeta ng ilang daang beses. Nilalamon at winawasak ng walang kabusugang mga korporasyon ang natitirang kalikasan, samantalang ang mayorya ng sangkatauhan ay walang sapat na makakain at serbisyong panlipunan sa kabila ng hindi na masukat na kayamanan ng iilang tao. Ang mahalaga ay may pagkakataon pa rin para pumili. Sa larangan ng filosofiya, ang akto ng pagpili na ito para sa isang tao ay, higit sa lahat, isang usapin ng kanyang piniling paraan ng pag-iral o di pag-iral sa daigdig. Isa itong etika. Gayunpaman, masasabing masalimot ang katayuan ng etika sa anyo nitong moralidad sa theoretikal na balangkas ng klasikal na Marxismo. Unang-una, nalalaman ng sinumang Marxista na ang anumang moralidad ay hindi maihihiwalay sa isang partikular na pangkasaysayang yugto, umiiral na superstruktura at makuuring interes. Mabisa ang kritika ng Marxismo laban sa di umano'y universalidad o ipinapangalandakang eternalidad ng mga sistemang etikal. Ngunit sa kabilang banda naman ay malinaw at matingkad ang paninindigang etikal at moral na damdamin ni na Marx at Engels sa lahat ng kanilang mga sulatin, kahit pa sa mga pinaka-theoretikal sa mga ito. Sa kanyang kritika ng programang Gotha, hindi tinanggihan ni Marx ang moralidad o etika per se. Ang tinatanggihan lamang niya ay ang etikang patuloy na nakakulong at nakapaloob lamang sa abot-tanaw ng lipunang burges. Sa gayoy, ang kailangan ay isang etikang lumalampas sa mga hangganang ito. Malinaw na isang bukas na tanong o proyekto ang paglampas na ito sa larangan ng etika sa bahagi ng mga kilusan na ngayon ay nakalubog sa buhay na praktikang mapagpalaya. Dulot ng kasilimuotan ng usaping ito ay lumilitaw ang ilang problematikong pagtingin sa etika kahit sa loob mismo ng mga kilusang revolusyonaryo. Ang una ay ang makaisang panig na kanang pagkakamali na halos eksklusibong itinatanghal ang aspektong moral ng mga akda ni na Marx at Engels. Sa ganitong paraan ay naisasantabi at nasasapawan ng estruktural na pagsusuri ng kapitalismo at ang mismong kritika ng ekonomiyang pampolitika na siyang masasabing pinakamalaki at pinaka-orihinal na mga ambag ni na Marx at Engels. Kahit minsay mabuti ang intensyon, nahuhulog ang ganitong direksyon sa mga ilusyon na hindi kritikal ng humanistikong universalismo na pinuna ni Jose Maria Sison. Ang ikalawa naman ay ang kaliwang pagkakamali na ganap na ibinabasura ang etikal na konsiderasyon bilang burges sa esensya at inuturing ang ganitong mga pagbubulay-bulay bilang malaking sagabal o pamigil sa ultra-sectarian at super-kaliwang mga aksyon na wala di umanong kinikilalang anumang makatao o di makataong mga hangganan. Ang isa pang suliranin ay ang pinagmumulan o batis na tinatawag ni Engels sa anti-Düring na proletaryong etika o moralidad. Kung ito nga ay may tuturing na filosofiya, ano ang magiging mga batis nito bilang filosofiya? Ito ba ay eksklusibong maibabalangkas ng mga akademikong philosopher batay sa mayaman na tradisyon ng kanluraning filosofiya? O kahit pa isama na natin ang mga dakilang tradisyong Asyano? Sa isang banda, bagamat may karaniwang mapagmaliit at limitadong pagpapahalaga kay Marx, hindi talaga kinikilala ng burges na akademya ang mga ambag ni na Engels, Lenin, Stalin at Mao sa filosofiya. Hindi sila itinuturing na katanggap-tanggap kahit bilang paksaman lamang ng kasaysayan ng filosofiya ng ika-20 taon. Gayunpaman, paminsan-minsan, ay totoong may mga sumisikat na akademikong philosopher na inaako para sa kanilang mga sarili ang katawagang Marxista o kahit Maoista pa nga, na nakikipagtunggali sa larangang pilosopikal sa kanilang mga bansa tulad ng Germany, France o USA. Maituturing ba sila bilang pangunahing mga inspirasyon sa pagbubuo ng proletaryong etika? Kung interesado man sila rito at dito rin sa Pilipinas? Hindi sinasabi ditong hindi sila maaaring maging mga batis. Ang tanong lang ay kung maaaring maging pangunahing mga batis ang ganitong uri ng filosofiya. Lalo pang malaking problema ito para sa Pilipinas na hindi maituturing na isang bansa na nagbibigay ng labis na pagpapahalaga sa filosofiya o pamimilosofiya. Sa katunayan, ang revolusyonaryong kilusan sa Pilipinas ang isa sa mga pambihirang institusyong panlipunan sa Pilipinas na nagbibigay ng pagpapahalaga sa pag-aaral ng filosofiya at ng pagpopularisa nito sa hanay ng mga manggagawa at magsasaka. Totoo na marami pang kailangang iwasto at paunlarin sa ganitong linya ng gawain, ngunit malinaw na ang filosofiya ng kilusang revolusyonaryo ay hindi maihahanay sa mga akademikong filosofiya. Wala itong tuwirang kinalaman sa paglitaw at paglipas ng iba't ibang uso o pinagkakahumalingan sa akademikong filosofiya. Hindi ito nakikisabay at tama lamang na hindi ito nakikisabay. May sarili itong panahon, kabuluhan, at tunguhin. Sa ganang ito, dapat seryosohin ang panawagan ni Mao na ang mga aktivistang naghahangad mag-aral ng filosofiya ay kailangan lumubog at makipamuhay sa masa at lumahok sa iba't ibang mga kampanya, pakikibaka at tunggalian ng mga uri. Ang materialismo ng kilusan, kung meron itong anumang kabuluhan, ay hindi isang espekulatibong materialismo, kundi isang praktikal at mapagpalayang materialismo sa pakahulugang ibinigay na rito ni Lenin at maging ni Bertolt Brecht. Ang etika ng kilusang revolusyonaryo ay hindi isang abstraktong etika, kundi isang etika na nabubuo at nagkakahugis sa pamamagitan ng revolusyonaryong praktika. Malino sa mga sulatin ni JMS hinggil sa filosofiya ang panawagan para sa pagsasabuhay, pagpapayaman at pagpapaunlad ng proletaryong etika o moralidad sa gitna ng kasalukuyang mga pakikibaka at maging ng sosyalistang moralidad sa panahon naman ng pagtatayo ng sosyalismo sa hinaharap. Tampok ang temang ito higit sa lahat sa kanyang pagpapahalaga sa kategorya ng kontradiksyong di-antagonistiko, na bagamat unang sumulpot sa mga pilosopong Soviet noong 1930s, ay bukod tanging binigyan ng higit na wastong elaborasyon ni Mao. Sa kabilang banda, tipikal na pananaw mula sa akademikong filosofiya ang mapagmaliit at mapagkutya na pagpapasaring ni Adorno sa kategoryang ito sa isang sulatin niya, bilang halimbawa ng mapagpanggap na katalinuhan ng mga Chinese. Kahit pabunga ito ng mayaman na karanasan ng pagre-revolusyon ng daan-daang milyong tao na nagkataon lamang ay hindi mga Europeo. Sa katunayan, kung mayroon mang akda ni Mao na kumakatawan sa praktikal na filosofiya na masasabing nagkaroon ng malalim na epekto sa praktika ng mga mawisa sa Pilipinas, ito ang akdang hinggil sa wastong paghawak ng mga kontradiksyon sa hanay ng mamamayan. Mahalaga ang interview kay JMS kung saan nagbigay siya ng pagsusuri at komentaryo sa sanaysay na ito ni Mao. Lumaganap ang sanaysay na ito ni Mao sa internasyonal na antas bilang bahagi ng maliit na koleksyong binansagang 5 sanaysay hinggil sa filosofiya na naglalaman din sa mga bantog na sanaysay na hinggil sa praktika at hinggil sa kontradiksyon. Sinangayunan ni JMS ang palagay ni Mao na sa maraming pagkakataon ay maaaring mangibabaw ang mga di-antagonistikong paraan ng pagresolba sa mga kontradiksyon sa hanay ng mamamayan tulad ng diskusyon, pangangatwiran, panghihikayat at edukasyon. Kailangang tamang panghawakan ng mga kontradiksyon sa lipunan upang maiwasan ang mga pagkakamali at anumang kalabisan. Kung sakaling mangyari, dapat maiwaso agad ang mga ganitong uri ng pagkakamali at malinis ang mga pangalan ng mga naakusahan. Kasama na sa pagwawastong ito ang pagpuna at pagpuna sa sarili upang maiwasan hanggat maaari ang pag-uulit ng ganitong mga pagkakamali. Dagdag pa, ang sinumang pinaghihinalaan na nagsasagawa ng mga kriminal na aktibidad sa lipunang sosyalista ay dapat dumaan sa mga karampatang legal na proseso na mahigpit na nakabatay sa ebidensya. Sinalungguhitan ni JMS na kailangan matuto sa pagkakamali ni Stalin ng pagdeklara ng pagpawi ng mga uri sa USSR noong 1936, na humantong sa mga pagkakamali sa pamamaraan ng paghawak ng mga antagonistiko at di-antagonistikong mga kontradiksyon sa loob ng lipunang Soviet. Makikita sa mga usaping ito na may malalim na kinalaman ang kategorya ng di-antagonistikong kontradiksyon sa pagbubuo ng proletaryong etika ng pakikitungo, pakikipagkaisa, at pakikitunggali sa isang makauring lipunan. Sa ganang ito, interesanteng palagay ni JMS sa kanyang panawagan para sa dialogo sa pagitan ng mga sistemang etikal na Kristiyano, Burges Liberal at Proletaryado na maaaring may mga bahagi itong komon na pwedeng maging batayan ng naturang dialogo. Gayun din, nakakaintriga ang kanyang palagay, katulad din ng palagay ni Engels, na bagamat walang maaangkin na eternalidad ang tatlong sistemang ito, maaaring nagtataglay ang proletaryong moralidad ng pinakamaraming elemento na pangmatagalan, kung hindi man permanente. Mababatid na humahalaw ang proletaryong etika sa pakahulugan ni JMS sa mayayamang mga aral, kapwa ng mga tagumpay at pagkabigo ng mga nakaraang karnasang revolusyonaryo sa dating USSR, China, Vietnam, Indonesia, Cuba, at ng iba pang mga positibong kilusan sa daigdig. Malinaw na hindi magkasalungat ang siyensya ng ekonomiyang pampolitika at ang proletaryadong etika. May pinagbabatay ang etika ang kritika ng ekonomiyang pampolitika at nakabatay din ang proletaryong etika sa ekonomiyang pampolitika. Hindi pagbabalat bunga lamang ang binanggit ni Engels na paglitaw ng proletaryong moralidad ng kinabukasan. Gayunpaman, sumisibol ang etikang proletaryado sa gitna ng tunggalian ng mga uri. Hindi ito bunga lamang ng revolusyon sa katapusan nito, kundi namumuo at nagkakahugis sa gitna at sa proseso ng pagrerevolusyon mismo.
Wow, that was puro Tagalog. Thank you, Professor Guillermo. Isang bagsak. Okay, here we go again. 1, 2, 3. Okay, wait a minute. You didn't join. One more time. 1, 2, 3. Okay. We discovered that you cannot post comments on YouTube for questions. So if you would still like to post a question and you're on YouTube, please send an email to jmsbooklaunch@gmail.com. So paulit, I hope you can read this, jmsbooklaunch@gmail.com. Before going to our much-awaited open forum, we have for you an interpretative dance of the song Levantate y Mira by Victor Hara, performed by the Rode Lilies or Red Lilies, accompanied on piano by 11-year-old Ilian Taguba. Thank you, Ilian and the Rodi Ladies, for a beautiful and heartwarming performance.
Also, so much history lies behind this piece. Victor Jara was a Chilean poet, singer, composer. He was a political activist, tortured and killed during the dictatorship of Chilean President Augusto Pinochet, a dictatorship fully enabled by United States imperialism all throughout those dark years. And this song is one of Jara's most famous musical compositions, Levantante e Mira La Montana, or Rise Up and Look at the Mountain, or as we Filipinos know it, Tumindig Ka. At this point, Chico, we now open the floor to a conversation with Professor Jose Maria Sison himself. So may we request all to raise and respond to the many questions you have prepared. So, and please make them straight to the point so we can devote more time to the Q&A. There are actually questions that have been sent to us, so I have the honor to read the first one. Professor Joma, are you ready? Okay,
yes.
First question. Kajoma, ready? What are your top 3 books for readings that you would recommend for young or new activists? 3
The question
only.
is difficult, but too many books to choose from. But anyway, I will try to give you the most necessary readings one has to make at the beginning. So first, you have the Communist Manifesto. Then second, let's have something from Lenin, What is to be Done. And then from Mao, let's have Correct Handling of Contradictions Among the People. And that gives us an opening to, you know, the great proletarian cultural revolution.
Wow. Chico,
Yes.
fire away.
Yes, there are more questions. Ito lang, 3 lang din ha. What slogans best capture the gist or spirit of MLM philosophy?
Well, I would say the first slogan would be divide one into two. Do not be so much awed by something whole. There's nothing you cannot analyze, no? So divide one into two. That's actually a simple expression of contradiction, no? And the study of contradiction. Then next is to rebel is justified. So you know that covers a lot of ground, huh? But I mean, obviously this slogan is within the frame of the class struggle, no? And then dare to struggle and dare to win. So you have you got 3 slogans. The question is also difficult because there's so many slogans that you would miss, like workers of the world unite and oppressed peoples and nations unite. No. So anyway, you got 4. You're asking only for 3 slogans.
Okay, Professor Sison, third question. Did philosophy have a role in bolstering or fanning revisionism in contemporary China and the former USSR?
Naturally, bourgeois ideology, taking the form of philosophy, was promoted by the revisionists in both the Soviet Union and China. And you see, by the law of the contradiction, you know, when you stand, for instance, for Marxist materialist philosophy, you consider the contradiction between materialism and idealism, and anyone can flip, no? Whereas you have to understand both sides and then take sides with, let's say, the materialist position, but if you are the weakling sort of thinker, oh, there's some merit in on the other side, and then you keep on enlarging that. And then in society, you see, after the socialist revolution begins, don't think that the cultural influence of the old society does not continue. There are sayings and parables that come from the old society. There are the old customs, old ideas, and old habits, no? And those can influence you. And then I'll cite and then the international bourgeoisie keeps on sending out influences from the outside, no? Let's say the Voice of Freedom, the Voice of Europe, no, run by the U.S. or many concrete things. I'll go anecdotal, no. You see, there are children of the upper middle class intellectuals or some small property owners, no. They were not classified as enemies, as there was no hindrance to, the study of the children in school. But then, there is the influence of the family. Or let's say, let's take the children of landlords who were able to, who have been able to continue in the new society. They'll say, tell the children, oh, this area used to be ours, no? Oh, that company used to be ours, no? We used to own 90% of the stocks in that company. So, and then, officials of the Chinese society travel. And of course, there are foreign embassies and visitors. And then special stores are open for foreigners to suit their foreign taste and or international likings for certain things. So I would be approached by a comrade, a Chinese comrade. Will you buy? Because ordinary Chinese people cannot buy from those foreign stores. So I would be asked, can you buy this thing for me? And as a foreigner, I would do a good turn for the friend. Or let us say there are comrades who go on delegations to foreign conferences, After the conferences, they go shopping, and there they get influenced by the level of things. There are things not readily available in a socialist society. The capitalist society is ahead, in producing, this high-tech products. It could be, say, in the 1950s, cameras would be a big deal, So the country bumpkins of the East Germany would be so impressed, They become impressed with the West having those cameras. Then you have the video recorders, and then so many other things. Because the socialist society has not reached the stage of producing these new things, these electronic products. Their mind become influenced. So it's not true that the situation is very bad in the imperialist countries. They have new things that we do not have, So that sort of thing. And then the wise guys, the revisionists who rise up in the bureaucracy and in the universities, who start suggesting, oh, let's put up an institute of North American studies or U.S. and Canadian studies. Yeah? So under the guise of knowing more about the world, no? And of course with emphasis on the West. Studying under the auspices of the Institute of Marxism-Leninism would look antiquated, no? The new thing that is attractive to the students would be the Institute of North American Studies, and students would flood into the subjects, into the classrooms of this institute. Also, that's how a socialist society can be penetrated. But there can be a good thing that will arise from what has already happened with the Soviet Union and breaking up, and China become capitalist like Russia. What is good is that the increase of imperialist powers make the crisis of the world capitalist system worse. And so in the forthcoming rounds of class struggle between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, there will be bigger opportunities, wider opportunities for the proletariat to advance the socialist revolution. So that's how philosophy can be introduced forthrightly in its bourgeois form, be it idealist or subjectivist, and but there are there are circumstances that help, no, to discredit, no, what may be considered already as catechism, no, taught in the Marxist classes, no. So they think, this is something new, because the Western imperialist powers are clever at ideological work, no? They have the think tanks, they have the philosophy departments, and they churn out a lot of ideologies or philosophies that run counter to Marxism-Leninism. You just imagine, you have the Austrian school, the Frankfurt school, and all those posterior philosophies from Paris, and then you have the so-called analytic philosophy or empiricism in British, in the United Kingdom. You have the school of Chicago, and so on. So the imperialists take seriously ideological struggle, and they put forward their philosophies and bring them to the socialist countries in order to subvert what should be the dialectical materialist and socialist thinking in the socialist countries.
Thank you, Professor Sison, for that answer. Another question was, why is it that red political power still exists in the Philippines? Can you elaborate on that, please?
Well, red political power still exists in the Philippines, and thanks to the teaching of Mao, that the countryside provides not only the physical terrain, but the social terrain for protracted people's war. And, you can have a wide agriculture as in the West, large tracts of land operated by rich farmers as well as big agri-corporations, no? You don't have the social terrain there for protracted people's war right now, when agriculture is, when the rural population is reduced to 2%. But in a semi-colonial country like China before 1949, and the Philippines right now, also a semi-feudal country, you have the most numerous class the peasantry in the countryside. That provides you the social terrain. No, that is the class that will keep blind and deaf the enemy looking for the NPA, and that is the class that will nurture, protect, and shield the NPA from enemy attacks. So that's how the Protected People's War has gone on, and the NPA has continued to exist, and red political power to mean having the revolutionary mass base of revolutionary mass organizations and the local organs of political power. They are there. And so I always have a big laugh when, these idiots like Duterte, Lorenzana, down to paid hacks like Tiglao and so on, no? And they say, oh, you've been fighting for more than 50 years, but you have not taken over Manila yet. No, you're crazy. The red political power is being built in the countryside. The local organs of political power constitute a new state, a new government of the workers and peasants against the Manila-based government of big compradors and landlords. No? So that's the beauty of Protracted People's War. You, without taking over yet the cities because you don't have the armed strength to do it, you can build the people's government in the countryside. That's the beauty of it. And right now, modesty aside, the armed revolutionary movement in the Philippines is now #1 in the world. No? It has developed the revolutionary forces and revolutionary movement, mass movement in the countryside comprehensively, despite what? Despite the strategic setbacks suffered by the working class because of modern revisionism, and despite already 4 decades of neoliberalism, abusing the proletariat and yet extending the life of capitalism and providing, consumer products by resorting to loose credit, loose credit for building, for making the big constructions private and public, and then that is to provide the cash flow for supporting the exchange of raw materials from the underdeveloped countries and the manufacturers. But in a deep way, the Philippine economy has become rotten that way. And but now the problem for the world capitalist system is really the public debt bubble of all countries. That is about to explode. And the rottenness of the Philippine economy is ensured by neoliberalism and, of course, by the bureaucratic corruption and military overspending by the Duterte regime. So thanks to them, there is a recrudescence of the Marcos fascist dictatorship, which is the manifestation of a system that is going to pot, that is a system that is decomposing. So Duterte, you have to thank Duterte for being the chief recruiter for the revolutionary movement. He took the place of Marcos. The revolutionary movement advanced rapidly with the son of Agan Marcos thought it could suppress it. Now you have another crazy guy, this Duterte, wanting to suppress the revolutionary movement. But let us see how he can invent claims that he is succeeding at his puppet ways of trying to please his imperialist and reactionary masters.
Next question, Kajoma. How can something like philosophy be in any way related to a politically charged idea like Marxism, Leninism, Maoism?
In the history of mankind, there's such a long period, thousands. You consider slave society, where you saw in the Western philosophical tradition, you have Plato, Aristotle, and then you have the suppression of the rudimentary materialist philosophers, because the ruling class, the slave owners, favor the idealism of Plato. And then came the feudal period, in the I choose the Western European tradition, because that's where you have the sequence of you have social developments, and social circumstances under which certain philosophies. So another kind of idealism, or a variant. No, you have the absolute idea of Plato, which was regnant in Greek society and in Rome, starting from the 4th century. You have the ascendance of Christianity, with its objective idealism, and this kind of philosophy ascribing to God everything, dismissing, sweepingly dismissing everything else as the creation of God, serves the feudal aristocracy. So every philosophy that is dominant serves the ruling class, this the Christianity availed of only the objective idealist or type of philosophy from slave society. So you have Christian philosophers like Saint Augustine using Plato, Aristotle, then you have Saint Aquinas later on using Aristotle. No? So there is a kinship between the slave masters and the feudal aristocracy, in that they exploit a lot of people or put to work on the land. No, but came the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie rose up, and very much the bourgeoisie at first, with the development of handicrafts and manufacturing, appeared to be very much responsible for what they create, without having to pray to the God, And then came then in the field of science, there would be great advances, and mechanical physics of mechanics of Newton would arise. And then among philosophers who look over the entire society, they would make a shift from from divinism to humanism. And before you know it, you reach, before you know it, in my account, I bring you right away to the 18th century of the Enlightenment. No? and this time, the sovereign will is no longer ascribed to whoever is the monarch and someone above, a supreme being above the monarch. The will of the people now becomes the revolving point for the people to be able to move forward. And so you have the concept of the people's sovereignty, and you have the principle of liberal democracy coming up. So that's the first big political breach on the notion that the social order is preordained by God, and it is people who make history. That's the beginning. You have to give credit to the liberal Democrats, ascribing to the people, and the bourgeoisie advance, raising the flag of the raising the rags of the poor, the poor peasants and plebeians as their flag. So anyway, came the came the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, and you have Marx and Engels within the first half of the 19th century. So a further advance on realistic and practical thinking among scholars and people. And Marx and Engels availed of the advances made by idealist philosophy. That's how they got to know Hegel and turned it upside down to put on a materialist basis the concept of dialectics, and so on and so forth. So the connection between philosophy and politics in Marxism-Leninism is maintained by the previous ruling classes, by the previous societies. The overarching idea is the absolute idea or the God. Now, for the first time down on earth, you have a new class looking over the entire universe and the entire society, and then interpreting the universe and human society, and not only interpreting, as Marx pointed out. You have the proletariat with its core of philosophers and professional revolutionaries, as Lenin would point out, determined to change the world. The point is to change the world. That's the teaching of Marx. So philosophy is something you cannot do away with in making a revolution. So, as a matter of fact, it is the first component of the three basic components of Marxism, which are philosophy, political economy, and social science.
Thank you for that elaboration, Professor Sison. Are you still okay? Okay.
Are you still okay? Are you still okay?
Yeah.
Okay. From that historical perspective, we go back to the more contemporary time. And there's a question of what is, in your opinion, the effect of non-inclusion of Maoism in some struggles like Cuba, the DPRK, and others?
Well, if the big socialist states have gone capitalist, and you can see that they fell short of the philosophy, the political economy, and social science demanded by scientific socialism. And these earlier socialist societies became vulnerable to subversion by modern revisionism. Now, there are two ways of describing these smaller scale countries that avow to be socialist or that carry the socialist cause. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. They're better off than the former big brothers because, they continue to exist. So in their own ways, they have been able to prevent a revisionist subversion that amounts to bringing down that results in bringing down their states, which have certain socialist features, like, the acclamation of the proletariat as the leading class, public ownership of the means of production, or at least the principal means of production. And then there are certain elements, in this compendium of Maoist ideas. They have there are certain elements. For instance, DPRK is very pronounced in saying, "Oh, we have the philosophy of Juche. We have the Juche is self-reliance. That's very Maoist, even if they don't say it comes from Mao. For indeed, it can come only from the people that are self-reliant. But as idea, well, at least you can say there is a similarity between Maoism and Kim Il-sung's idea of duty. And then also the case of Cuba, without saying the same thing, like self-reliance decides everything. You have seen that in so many ways, in accordance with so many ideas that amount to, keeping a self-reliant political and economic system, you have a country so small, right at the only 90 miles away from the US. It survived. So there must be something good there to see. And so I don't have to cover the others. There are too many of them. No, some say Vietnam is another good remnant of the old system of socialist states. No, but some say, well, when they won in 1975, they were in big trouble because the Soviet Union was already deteriorating. The Soviet economy was deteriorating, and then they have to resort to the Doimoy system, like China has done. They adopted certain reforms, allowing more private entrepreneurs to operate in the economy. So you have to study these countries one by one. The point is they stay on. Insofar as they can stay on, there is some strength for them to stay on, because the imperialists do not love them anyway completely, although the imperialists may like certain developments, and they try to subvert these countries. But you see, the Philippine Revolution may be credited with being able to withstand the strategic setbacks of the socialist cause and the imposition of neoliberalism, which has been running for more than 4 decades. So, having an ongoing, growing revolutionary movement in the Philippines is quite an achievement. That's why it's now being targeted by U.S. imperialism, and they're using a butcher, Duterte. Duterte was a chosen puppet to do this campaign to destroy the movement by mass killing and all sorts of barbarities in a dirty war. Because the U.S. wants to complete the process of destroying the world proletarian revolution, especially the outstanding remnants. The other outstanding remnant is the Maoist-led People's War in India, and that has a good future if the Indian Maoists do their fighting well. They have the scale of building large armies, like in the Soviet Union and in China. No? The Philippines has. This is what is wonderful about the Philippine Revolution. No? You see, the Philippines consists of so many islands, but of course we have already demystified. No? There's thousands of islands, as you say, 11 of those islands carry 94% of the population. So don't be confused by the islands, unless the Chinese imperialism is trying to grab some of them. No, we have been able. There is that song, which is very good. No, turning so many islands into a muog na buo, no? A whole fortress. But the Filipinos have always been outstanding in making revolution in the modern world. No, the Philippines was the first to wage successfully the old democratic revolution, against Spanish colonialism, and the first to fight a Western imperialist power, the United States. But of course, the Vietnamese have gone ahead in being able to inflict the first defeat on that monster, U.S. imperialism. So the Filipino revolutionaries have a historical record that is very heroic, and they know, the revolutionary forces know how to preserve themselves and grow strength. It's just right. It's just right that in certain regions, right now in the strategic stage of the strategic defensive, you have squads and platoons and sometimes companies inflicting thousands of wounds on the enemy. And before you know it, there shall be companies and battalions to carry out the strategic stalemate. And eventually, you have the battalions and regiments that will more speedily carry out the nationwide seizure of power in a general offensive.
Great. Okay, I think I have the last question here. Do you still have a question, Chico? Unless there are more questions, I think this would be the last one from our audience. So, Kajoma, are you ready for this?
Yes, China is, by the definition of Lenin, of
Go ahead. Okay, I'm just going to read it. How should we deal with Chinese imperialism, and how are you able to reconcile current China with Mao Zedong's original vision?
By the definition of modern imperialism by Lenin, China has all the characteristics, So the only difference there from the imperialist powers in the time of Lenin is that you have a combination of state monopoly capitalism and private monopoly capitalism. They work together in the Chinese example of modern imperialism. So let us review the 5 characteristics. Monopoly capitalism dominates Chinese economy and society. Then you have the integration of bank capital and industrial capital. China can, invest so fast because, the cousins, the brothers and cousins on both sides of the two-tiered economy help each other out with loans, oftentimes bad loans. China is now sitting on a mountain of bad loans. But at any rate, these Chinese capitalists have been able to grow an industrial economy, contrary before to the notion that China will be reduced to a big comprador economy with the use of these low-tech sweatshop operations. Then you have the export of surplus capital. And the China was very clever at using the surplus from the trade with the US. That surplus in Chinese banks were not entirely Chinese, but they were able to. They have been able to use it for lending to so many countries, up to the this Belt and Road Initiative. Then you have this China in combination with other imperialist powers. China has been trying hard to retain its partnership with the U.S., but the U.S. Has already regarded China as its chief political rival and economic competitor. So China is now compelled to rely more on its combination with Russia. But someday Russia can complain because China is moving into the former Soviet republics like Kazakhstan and so on. And this business, this loan imperialism, lending surplus capital involves gouging terms. The terms are so onerous. So many countries have been complaining. And the U.S. is out to sabotage the expansion of Chinese capital. And then you come to the fifth feature. in the fifth feature, long ago, since the time of Lenin, the world was already completely covered by global capitalism. Now, what is worse now is there are two big imperialist powers in addition to the traditional ones in G7, makes the world explosive. No? So, and in our region, in the first case of outright aggression, no? China has been claiming the exclusive economic zone and extended continental shelf of the Philippines. Well, China, the post-Mao China can be seen, can be understood most clearly by considering what was done by 1978. I mean, not so many people noticed that as early as 1976, the Deng Xiaoping was already able to make a coup d'etat against the proletariat. And it was the coup d'etat was done in with the combination of the rightist of Deng and the centrist. But by 1978, Mao was completely negated completely because the GPCR, the crown jewel of Maoist ideology, and its practical application in the GPCR was judged to be a complete catastrophe. And Deng Xiaoping, together with the centrists, were able to push the concept of modernization, which means adapting bourgeois economic reforms, capitalist economic reforms, up to allowing the foreign investors to come in order to, accelerate modernization of the Chinese economy and opening up to the U.S. and the world capitalist system. So, and proletarian internationalism has been dismissed as something very narrow, and the wide thing is integration in the world capitalist system. So China has been definitely developing as a capitalist country since 1970, with the dismantling. There was a dismantling of the commune system. The rural, the publicly owned rural industries were privatized, and the former big capitalists of China were paid one more time what had been paid for before, and the war bonds, and they were given access. They were given access to the state banks. So Deng Xiaoping was imitating the capitalists of Hong Kong and Shanghai. I'm sorry, Singapore rather. Deng Xiaoping learned a lot. You see, as early as 1957, when China was trying to move forward and adopt the Great Leap Forward, the capitalists of China in the state private corporations was collecting 25% of profits from corporations. That was a great deal, and Mao wanted to do away with that. But then revisionists like Liu Shaoqi, Deng Xiaoping, Chen Yun, and others in the Central Committee, especially Peng Dehuai, they didn't like this, and they were already following the Soviet example of modern revisionism. And so Mao really had a difficult time up to 1976. Well, the current China now is anti-Mao, even if they have the face of Mao at Tiananmen or on every Chinese money bill. No? They are using, this is how great people are treated. No, Claro, I'll give you an example, local example. No, Claro Mayo Recto was a product of the Ateneo. He was not just summa cum laude, he was maxima cum laude, near perfect score like Rizal. And they're the only two graduates of Ateneo who are considered maxima cum laude. When Recto was attacking US imperialism, the American Jesuits at the Ateneo hated him like hell, no? But when he died, he would be honored. No, at least there were ceremonies. That is Mao. He's great in Chinese history, but the revisionists and the capitalist roaders would only give lip service in order to advance their policies. So that's the situation. There is something hypocritical about Chinese monopoly capitalism. No, it says it is socialism with Chinese characteristics, but that's a lot of bull. No, nationalist bull.
Okay. Thank you so much for your insights and time, Professor Sison. For questions we cannot accommodate today, please send them to jmsbooklaunch@gmail.com. That's jmsbooklaunch@gmail.com. And we will respond to them as soon as possible. And of course, we invite all to get your copies of the book online from Apple Books, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Kobo, or in print at La Solidaridad and popular bookstores in Manila. And thank you all for participating in our conversation with the author. Thank you so much to our audience here on Zoom and on YouTube, on Facebook, everywhere. And remember, the power of MLM is that it is a philosophy that's put into action through the struggle to free the working class from oppression. And for our closing, let us now listen to Filipino musician and composer Danny Fabella, who will offer a performance of his song titled Busabos ng Puhunan, or Slaves of Capital, or Those Enslaved by Capital.
Araw ay laging nagpapagal. Kayong sa bawat oras yaman ang iniluluwal. Bumubuhay sa puhunan at sistemang sa inyo'y nagsakdal. Sa hukuman ng mayaman, hinatulang tamad at hangad. Kayo'y pinarusahan, makihabang buhay, magsilbi at pakainin at bigyan ng karangyaan. Parasitikong nagahari sa lipunang kinasadlakan ng iyong uri ng sala, manggagawa ng isinilang. Ito'y hindi kapalaran, sinabi ng hari, mga paham. Hindi kapalaran, hindi rin pagsubok na sinasabi ng simbahan. Ito'y isang kalagayan, sinadyang sa inyo ay gawin, na dapat wasakin at dapat baguhin. Ito ang inyong tungkulin. hanggat sa ating batas ang salapi mas matimbang sa dangalat, katuwiran at sa buhay niyo't karapatan na malaunan niyuratan ng Panginoong may kapitan. Ito ay hindi kapalaran, sinabi ng hari at mga baham. Hindi kapalaran, hindi rin pagsubok na sinasabi ng simbahan. Ito ay isang kalagayan, sinadyang sa inyo ay gawin, na dapat wasakin at dapat baguhin. Ito ang inyong tungkulin. Ito ay hindi kapalaran, sinabi ng hari at mga baham. Hindi kapalaran, hindi rin pagsubok na sinasabi ng simbahan. Ito ay isang kalagayan, sinadyang sa inyo ay gawin, na dapat wasakin at dapat baguhin. Ito ang inyong tungkulin, makasaysayang tungkulin.
Thank you very much for this song about the working class, Danny Fabella. Can we, Kajoma, Professor Joma, are you still with us? May we have a quick last word from you before we end? Meron bang final word?
Sarah and Chico for hosting this webinar. And of course, I thank all of our listeners. I hope that they've been able to get more information and more ideas about our subject matter than before.
Okay, thank you so much. And last but not the least, to close our book launch today with an inspirational message, let us hear from the chairperson of the National Labor Center Kilusang Mayo Uno, or May 1st movement in the Philippines, Ka Elmer Kabong Labog.
Yeah, magandang gabi po sa inyo lahat. I wish to express warm solidarity greetings to Professor Jose Sison. You're so full of life. You are so energetic. And I think the session should have been extended more to accommodate more of the questions. Also, I'd like to thank all of you who took time to participate in the launching of the second book of the Sison Reader Series on the philosophy of Marxism-Leninism-Maoism. We have pointed out the relevance of having this series, especially for workers and all those fighting for genuine national and social liberation. The volume on philosophy lays the basic foundation for the study and application in other fields such as political economy and the revolutionary struggle towards scientific socialism. The Marxist materialist dialectic is a weapon of the working class, and it must serve all workers and the oppressed. Comrade Sison has given us this indispensable weapon. What really matters now is our ability to practically apply our wealth of MLM fundamentals to our daily lives and struggles. For us workers and revolutionaries, the Marxist tool of SICA, or social investigation and class analysis, has been of universal importance and an indispensable tool as it has guided us so much in our task to arouse, mobilize, and organize the masses. In fact, for a long time now, SI alone has been a byword for concrete analysis of concrete conditions. We can enrich the aforesaid indispensable tool by perhaps savoring the important suggested powerful reading materials by Professor Jose Maria Sison, which are as follows. One, the Communist Manifesto. Second, what is to be done, and on the third, and the correct handling of contradiction. Selections which are also all my favorites. And so, as Professor Ramon Guillermo aptly puts it, integration with the masses is an important element of every movement. In the Filipino workers' lingo, gawaing masa and not gawaing mesa. The former means integrating and living with the masses. The latter, working most of the time in your office desk. To quote Mao, open quote, communists are like seeds, and the people are like the soil. Wherever we go, we must unite with the people, take root, and blossom among them. End of quote. So, lessons from the working class struggles in the history of the Paris Commune, and especially the Great October Revolution, are significant cornerstones of the proletarian revolution and are inspirations to our continuing struggle. The 1917 Bolshevik Revolution virtually changed the face of the earth. The great liberations that followed in China, Latin America, and Vietnam are likewise golden historical events worth drawing lessons from in our present struggles. We are glad that notwithstanding the limitations and restrictions brought about by the pandemic and continuing persecution against Jose Maria Sison by the US-China Duterte regime, we are still able to make this launch a success. Filipino workers, Professor Joma, are eagerly awaiting for the copies of the series. Although I've heard that it's already available in various bookstores here, I believe that workers in general should have basic knowledge of MLM. This is their theory, this is their practice, this is their very life. For those having difficulty in study, we can have study guides and other teaching aids. This series is definitely of great significance. I am elated to learn from Comrade Irina Malenko, I hope I got her name correctly, that the book has been translated to Russian and made distribution in respectable volumes in Eastern Europe. And so I say, long live, mabuhay, Professor Jose Maria Sison. Long live the working class, long live Proletarian International Solidarity. And in ending, may I say, buy the book. Thank you and good day to all.
Thank you so much, Kabong. Long live the working class. Mabuhay ang uring manggagawa.
Yes, so events must end, and so we have to say goodbye. Before we do, we would like to thank our reviewers, Bomen Guillermo, Jerry Imbong, Irina Malenko, of course, the performers, the organizers, and special thanks to the technical and creative staff for making this book launch possible.
Last but not least, thank you to those who joined us for this online book launch. All interested in purchasing a copy can get it online from Apple Books, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Kobo. Also at La Solidaridad and popular bookstores in Manila, Philippines. We hope you enjoyed today's launch. Good morning and magandang gabi to everyone, and looking forward to your support for the next volumes in the Sison Reader Series. Isang bagsak!
Please don't leave us yet because we will be playing your favorite song.
Bangon sa pagkakapusapos, bangon, mabiyak ang mundo. Katwiran ay butal sa sakong mong lakas na danan mundo. Tapos na ang kahapoy ng din, tayong mabiyak. Isulong natin ang pagkakaisa ng uring manggagawa at magsasaka, ang ating sandigan sa pakikibaka tungo sa pambansang demokrasya. Silang nagtataglay ng tunay na lakas na dudurog sa imperialismo, burokrata, kapitalismo, feudalismo, ang mga salot na pumapatay.
Mula sa bundok at nayon, parang alon tayong susulong.
Kukupkupin at palalayain natin ang kalunsuran, at ating itatatag ang isang lipunang malaya sa isang revolusyong sosyalista hanggang mapawi ang pagsasamantala. Isulong natin ang pagkakaisa ng uring manggagawa at magsasaka, ang ating sandigan sa pakikibaka tungo sa pambansang demokrasya. Silang nagtataglay ng tunay na lakas na dudurog sa imperialismo, burokrata, kapitalismo, feudalismo, ang mga salot